Hi, I'm Alan Ross. I'm here at the IEEE PES T&D, that's a lot of acronyms, conference. This is the 2020 version that is actually being held in 2022. These interviews that we're conducting is with thought leaders on the future of the power industry. So enjoy. My guest at IEEE is Dan Roth. Dan is with Dynamic Ratings. We're going to get into a little bit of that, but Dan, thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Alan. Nice to see you again.
So, the first question that I've got is about the future, but before I get about the future, I want to go a little bit about the past. You've been part of IEEE for a year now, approximately?
Well, I've been an IEEE member for about 20 years.
So, you don't even look like you could do that.
Yeah, I started my career in relay protection.
Okay.
I worked for a small company in the industry called SEL.
Okay.
But since then, I went to Cooper Power Systems, which was then acquired by Eaton.
Yep.
And then I've been with Dynamic Ratings for about a year.
Okay.
So I'm new to this company, but I've been in the industry a long time.
Okay, good. Because we're going to come back around to that IEEE relationship here, but thank you for being here with us. One of the things that we're doing with these interviews is we're asking people, what does the future look like?
Right.
And you can go wherever you want to, and I'll say power industry, but you could be as specific or as general as you want. But what do you see as some of the trends that are taking place in the power industry?
So the power industry is probably a little bit slower moving than some of the other industries that you would look at. So some of the trends that are, if we think about the future as the next 10 years, some of them have already started, and different companies and different segments of the power industry are at different stages of that life cycle. Okay. So I think if you think about it as digital transformation of the grid, and you see a lot of the agenda and political motives in, improving the infrastructure of it, and sometimes you think of the mechanical infrastructure of the grid, so that's building power, transmission lines and improving the voltage rating of those, so that way you can transport power across the country easier, and that's all driven by trying to reduce climate impacts and carbon emissions and things like that. But then there's the other part of it where we need to operate the grid more efficiently, and that's driven by retiring workforce, loss of expertise in the industry, and improvements in technology. So if you think about kind of when the smart grid started, and that buzzword introduced into the industry, that was probably 2008 with some of the stimulus money that came from the Obama administration at the time. But that trend has continued. So you go more than 10 years now, and there's still people that are talking about the smart grid. There's now different terminology associated with it, but it's still trying to use digital technology to get more information from the grid so we can make smarter, better decisions, so we can operate it more efficiently. So
as a member of the Smart Grid Committee, I would agree with you. We've gotten a little bit stale, we know that, because it's been around. I think the 2030 standard actually did come out in 2008, but people were working on it long before that. I think the new term is grid modernization, and that kind of is what you're talking about. But you mentioned something of this whole idea of transformation, a digital transformation from an electromechanical. I am a mechanical engineer. You're an electrical engineer. I went to Georgia Tech Mechanical Engineering. You went to the University of Illinois?
That's right.
Urbana? Right. So I think now my generation of mechanical is saying it can't just be all on, hey, renewing the mechanical side. Money, the infrastructure bill is going to pump huge amounts of billions of dollars annually for the next decade into the industry. Technology. And those two things, wherever you see money and technology, you can spend a lot in the wrong way or you can spend a lot in the right way. Right. Talk a little bit about what you think technology change is going to be coming about in the future. So I think the most successful smart grid projects I've seen are where they can use the technology and fully integrate it into their business operation. So, you think about utilities, they're large organizations, they have different organizational structures, and the way they operate their network and their systems is different. So every utility has a slightly different flavor, and then that's even more different, and you get into heavy industrial, and some of the C&I customers, they operate differently. You get into renewable, they operate a little bit differently. And what's key is you got to make that technology fully integrated into their business operations. So the data has to go to the stakeholders, and it has to drive business results. So if you have a standalone technology pilot project, that's the trap a lot of people fall into, and they don't take the time to fully integrate it
And when I talk about operations, I mean, the SCADA supervisors have to have the right amount of data coming to them. You can't overload them with information, otherwise they start to shut down. Linemen need to understand the impacts to them and how they can remain safe and productive in their work, and make sure that the technology isn't putting them at greater risk or now a barrier to them doing their job. So those are all things that need to be considered when you're evaluating what is the right technical solution. And then you really have to stay focused while you're going through that effort, and not get lost in all the technical details, because there's a lot of new things that are exciting. And as engineers, we all really like to geek out on that kind of stuff. But you really have to stay focused on what is the business impact I'm trying to change, and are the decisions I'm making along the way furthering me to that agenda and to that end. And if you stay focused in that way, that's when we typically see the best results. And that's when the technology sticks and becomes a part of the culture of that company. And that's when you get unilateral buy-in across all the different silos and levels of the organization. And that buy-in is critical for it to scale. So in the utility industry, and both power industries, we have scalability that's not always matched everywhere else. And so that scalability, you have to have the right technology, and it has to be repeatable, and it has to be sustainable in order for it to scale. And so that's something that you need to focus on when you're considering and evaluating technology.
So one of the words that you used without using it was interoperability.
Yes.
But is a lot of what you're talking about, where technology for technology's sake is not what the industry needs.
Correct.
We need technology integrated together so that people can use and get information that they can make decisions on. So I want you've given a pretty good idea of the future of the industry. But as you look at things like electric vehicle, the electrification of transportation, wind and solar, and all of the change that's taking place in the infrastructure part of it, what is the impact that you think that's going to have on technology, or what is technology going to have as an impact on that?
Yeah, so you brought up electric vehicles.
Right.
And if you look at some of the things the Department of Energy has put together on electric vehicles, there's reports that are out there, and some of those reports allude to the fact that we probably have the generation capacity to keep up with electric vehicle demand.
Yeah.
So as electric vehicle demand increases, we're actually, even though the amount of generation we've put onto the grid in the last 10 years has been relatively flat, there's still enough capacity on the grid, and there's still enough new generation that's coming on just organically that we will be able to keep up with electric vehicle demand through 2030 or the next 10 years. The challenge is going to be on the capacity of the distribution system. So the distribution system itself is not necessarily have the line ratings and the transformer ratings to handle the load. The other part of it that's critical is the voltage. And what's good about the North America utility grid versus other parts of the world is we already have a lot of voltage control on a lot of parts of the distribution system. So switch capacitor banks, line voltage regulators, things like that. LTCs and the substations, those all allow us to manage the voltage impacts, but it's going to be the load and the capacity ratings on the lines and transformers that are going to be a real challenge. So when you think about technology, there's, electric vehicle chargers can be either unmanaged or they can be managed. And unmanaged electric vehicle chargers, they simply, as soon as you plug them in, they go full power immediately. The utility has no control over that situation. The grid, unfortunately, the problem is most of the electric vehicle residential charging will probably resonate with the normal peaks that are on the system.
Right.
So if you think about that afternoon peak between 4 and 8 p.m., that's common across almost every region of the U.S., that's when that unmanaged electric vehicle charging will occur.
Right.
And so that'll be additive to the peak, and that's going to further stress the system. So from a technology standpoint, we need to have managed electric vehicle charging as a way to curtail that behavior.
Right.
And then we can work within the capacity. So you talked about interoperability. The grid has the capacity to handle these electric vehicle chargers, but we just have to make them smarter, and we can use technology to do that. So that's a feedback loop to look at what is the capacity on the distribution system, which unfortunately a lot of utilities are struggling with. They don't have that visibility and that information, so that's where technology can be a solution. Right. But once they have that information, it's relatively easy to work with these electric vehicle chargers through the communications that are available, and they can do something smarter and better and make sure those electric vehicles are being charged within the capacity constraints of the distribution system.
That's a great perspective of electrification of transportation. Last question for you. So what is dynamic ratings doing? Where do you see the future of DR as it relates to all of these changes that are coming? Talk a little bit about your company.
Yeah, so our company heritage is in large power transformer asset monitoring. So we've established a good reputation in the industry as one of the leaders in large power transformer monitoring. But as some of the trends we talked about, we need to be more diversified. So we need to provide information to provide asset monitoring, but then also more efficient operation of the grid. So that all comes from data, but then that data has to be in a usable format. So that way we have that interoperability and it can be used within the operational structure of the utility. Yeah. So we're really diversifying ourselves as a company. So we're doing switchgear monitoring, our breaker monitoring. So the circuit breaker is not something that most utilities have monitored historically, but it's a part of the system. Yeah. And if your circuit breakers aren't operating efficiently, that causes stress on the entire grid, including your high value assets like power transformers. But we're also diversifying down into the distribution system. So we have a Connect Grid solution. It's an IoT based technology stack, and it allows us to do some of the things like we talked about with the electric vehicle chargers. So we can use the scalability of that IoT technology to really monitor as many assets on the distribution system as necessary, and we can even supplement some of the AMI systems and connect to that end user connection point to provide that important feedback loop, so that way utilities have the opportunity to do things a little bit smarter and to manage some of those operational constraints that we just discussed.
Excellent. Say hello to Tony and Katie and Justin and all the people at Dynamic Ratings. We work a lot with Dynamic Ratings. You are one of our strategic partners in terms of communicating to the marketplace. So thank you for that. Appreciate the time.
Good to see you again, Al. Thank you very much.